Welcome back to the Christianity in Business Podcast, an initiative of the Archie W. Dunham College of Business at Houston Baptist University. I'm your host, Darren Shearer, and this is the show that helps Christian business leaders to integrate biblical values into business. On this episode, we're joined by Paul Sanders and Leigh McElroy to discuss the legacy of the legendary Christian businessman and philanthropist, Morris Oldham. And we've said this a number of times on this show. You know, if you ask the typical Christian, who are the Christian heroes of the last, 100, 150 years, are typically going to give you the names of pulpit ministers and evangelists and people that left the business world to go and do quote unquote missionary work. And you're typically not going to hear the names of business people. Because for me, as a marketplace person myself, and I'm wanting to look toward other examples of Christians that I can relate to. And I look to, for example, R.G. Letourneau and John Wanamaker and Mary Kay Ash. And one that if you haven't heard of him, you're about to get a good dose here. An incredible man of God with an amazing legacy of commitment to the Lord in the marketplace, Morris Oldham. And Paul Sanders and Leigh are here to tell us all about him, at least what give us a taste of what's in the book, Lasting Good, which is the story of Morris Oldham and the Morris Oldham Little Church Foundation. Paul Sanders is the president and CEO of the Oldham Little Church Foundation, a foundation dedicated to helping small Protestant evangelical churches with facilities completion grants. Since the establishment in 1949, the OLCF has granted over $46 million to 16,800 churches across the U.S. As an architect by training, his experience in complex project development and planning has included key roles with Rice University, Texas Medical Center, and Texas A&M. And he holds a Doctor of Public Health from the University of Texas. And how did you put it, Paul? You went to A&M for your formal education?
Absolutely. Formal education at Texas A&M, then to trade school at UT.
So those of you who are familiar with the Aggie Longhorn rivalry can relate to that. And Leigh McElroy is an author, speaker, and Bible teacher who speaks at conferences and retreats across the U.S. She's created print and web content and curriculum for a variety of nonprofit and faith-based organizations, including Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City and the Oldham Little Church Foundation. Leigh holds a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Texas A&M and a Master of Arts in Apologetics from Houston Baptist University. Yes. She is the author of 5 books, including The Beautiful Ache and The Sacred Ordinary, and a collaborator, editor, or ghostwriter for another 17 published titles. And she may or may not have ghostwritten the book, Lasting Good, the story of Morris Oldham and the Oldham Little Church Foundation. Can we say that?
Oh, it wasn't ghostwriting. It was a definite collaboration. Yes.
Awesome. Well, she put that journalism expertise to good work, and just went after this story of Morris Oldham's life. And first of all, Paul and Leigh, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
Leigh, how did you get this? Because when I Googled Morris Oldham, there really was not much that came up. How were you able to tell this story?
It was really a challenge to tell Morris Oldham's story because he had no children, so he has no living heirs. So there's no family connections to speak with. And he died 65 years ago. So most of his contemporaries or colleagues in the business world have since died, or even some predeceased him. So as far as living history, we didn't have a great deal to go on. I started the project actually camping in Paul's office with 60 plus 70 years of Board of Trustees minutes to read the history of the foundation. And then the man, of course, comes through in in the telling of the things that they were involved in and the kinds of decisions they made and the way they made decisions. I used a few other sources. I found some local and national news stories that were helpful. I actually got on Ancestry.com to try to learn some more about his parents and his sibling, which we initially, I don't think, knew he even had a sibling. And then Stuart Morris Sr., who HBU listeners will be very familiar with, was actually the only person I could speak with who had real living memories of Mr. Oldham. But they were vivid, and that was a delightful recollection from him. So it was kind of piecemeal for sure.
Mm. And Paul, you've really been the chief torchbearer of the Oldham legacy over the last decade. From your perspective, who was Morris Oldham?
Morris Oldham was he was sort of a unsung hero. He was ahead of his time. I think he was an entrepreneur. He was a visionary. His degree was in agriculture from Cornell. He came to Houston when not many folks were living here in about 1912. Once he got some experience working for another dairy, which is what he was interested in, he decided he would deliver milk to houses with a horse and a wagon. I'm not sure where that motivation came from, but it was simple. He was focused, and he slowly built the business that became he was actually the largest independent dairyman west of the Mississippi when he sold the dairy in 1948. Morris Oldham actually did deliver milk. Even as the business grew, he wasn't one who would hire folks and delegate. Stuart Morris tells us a story when he was a boy that the wagon would pull up in front of their house. Morris Oldham would come to the back door, open the ice box, not refrigerator, ice box, put the milk in, take the old bottles, walk back out. The horse knew the route. So when he went to the next house, the horse simply moved to the next house, next house. So it told me there was a lot of discipline here of Morris Oldham, and he would have to be. He just had, I think, a great desire to see people know Jesus personally. His dairies, as they grew, were in small communities outside of Houston. I think he was aware of how those small communities, those folks lived. And I'm sure met some of those pastors, many of which were probably bivocational. So how he identified that these churches needed support and help with facilities is something that I think just slowly morphed, and he identified that need. And sort of, as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah. So at what point in his journey of running this company and growing this company did he really start to make these investments and these eternal investments in these small churches? Because I think a lot of times there's, it goes that, maybe the entrepreneur did some charitable giving during their life, but it wasn't until they actually died that they really, left any sizable amount of contribution to the charitable cause relative to their means.
I think that from what I read, and Leigh may have come across some other information, that the real focus of supporting these little small Protestant evangelical churches was after he sold the dairy and the foundation was created in 1949. I have no doubt, I don't know any documentation that he and his wife Florence were active at First Baptist, and then at Second Baptist, there was, beyond tithing that went on, and I'm sure helping churches along the way. But as far as being able to identify anything specifically, the first grant that we could find was about a $2,000 grant made in 1949.
Okay. Leigh, so I'm sure there were other players in the dairy industry at the time, but what made his company so successful? In today's startup vernacular, they might consider Morris Oldham's dairy a unicorn, something that was just so remarkable and so rare that it would have unicorn status. What was it that was so special about this company that made it in terms of just the monetary success of it?
Well, when he began, I would say his competitors would have been storefronts. And, producers of milk would have supplied storefronts with milk, and then the consumer would have bought from the storefront. Probably some consumers were also buying from producers, just in terms of a neighbor or a nearby farmer, whatever. But him actually delivering to the customer was an innovation. It's said that he was the first in Houston to develop a way to pasteurize milk, which would have made that delivery possible. And then he would just put huge blocks of ice in his delivery wagon and, take the milk and deliver it fresh that way. And then he started, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he just began acquiring smaller operations around Southeast Texas and then in the southeastern area, like Paul said, other side of the Mississippi River. And he just continued to identify opportunities and grow. But it really was a one man, one horse, one wagon beginning, taking his product directly to the customer. Another thing I would say, Darren, is that, and this interested me as a journalism person, he aggressively marketed his product. I mean, he was doing print advertising. He was doing what we would call today specialty advertising, creating little cookbooks and added on things that had recipes that involved dairy products. All kinds of memorabilia like that is sprinkled through Lasting Good, through the book. So you can see that he was an innovative marketer. He created an imaginary character named Phoenix Phil, who spoke to children about milk and dairy products. So, I mean, he really was very much an innovator. And I think that set him apart from his competitors.
Yeah. And that was Phoenix Phil. That was really kind of before the big ad age of the, 50s. So that's
it definitely preceded Elsie the cow.
Yes.
So, yeah. Wow. Yeah. Paul, anything you want to add to that in terms of what made his Oldham's Dairy so successful?
I think a lot of it was his employees. Well before employees owned a portion of the business, he made sure they were able to buy stock. He took care of employees during World War II. Of course, many of his employees went off to war. He took care of those families. He made sure those jobs were available when they returned. They had talking about marketing, they had a baseball team. Before we all played softball, they played baseball, and they had uniforms. And we have a photograph that shows who was who. And the story we heard from our friends in Wharton is that the team was so good that they really sort of asked them not to participate in the league after a few years. So again, whatever he touched was quality. But employees, we see that throughout the stories, and when we talk to a few folks in Wharton, one gentleman whose dad actually worked for Morris Oldham, and there was just high integrity, honesty, a focus on what you're doing, work hard, keep it simple, and he took care of employees. So I think that was instrumental in his growth also.
And what else would you say about the way he ran his company and expressed his Christian values through the way he ran his company? And I'll let both of you weigh in on this as well.
Well, as I said, high level of integrity and honesty. We knew that he really had a heart for the Lord and wanted folks to come to Jesus. And
how did you know? What was the evidence of that?
I know that we heard from Stuart Morris, and then we had an
And by the way, Stuart Morris, for anyone who might not be aware, you can go back previous episode we did with Matt Morris, the CEO of Stuart Title Company, one of the members of that family. But the Stuart Title Company, one of the, I think maybe the largest or one of the largest real estate title companies in the world. And just won all kinds of awards for just being one of the most trustworthy companies in America. And so Stuart Morris is the founder of that company, correct?
Yeah, it was really a relative, but yes, it was their family that actually established title insurance in the state of Texas.
And Stuart Morris has been one of the most generous givers to Houston Baptist University, and so there's another lesson there, just the way that that these legends, these Christian business legends, kind of stuck together and kind of spurred one another on to good works.
Yeah, Stuart's brother Carlos was an attorney. We had an audio interview years ago, and that really told us a lot. Also, he was a little bit older than Stuart and was Mr. Oldham's attorney. So we have firsthand information of how, in the early days, what was Morris Oldham all about. And Stuart Sr. tells a story of making a trip with Morris Oldham as a relatively young man. And he was quizzed by Morris Oldham, wanted to know about Stuart. What are you about? What's your life about? What do you believe in? So it was pretty evident that he was really focused. He wanted to know who he was working with. He wanted to know about those folks. And all the indications we get from some of those firsthand conversations is that he was a Christian through and through. Every decision he made was based on, wisdom that he felt like that he was getting from God. He was a prayerful man, and was, and those principles were carried out throughout his life, and that's just the way he did business.
Leigh, anything you want to add in terms of how his Christian values emerged through the way he ran the company?
I think the employee piece is that Paul mentioned is really important. Every record that I came across about him would verify his integrity, his care of people. When it came time to organize the book, because we couldn't organize it as a typical chronology history, like this happened in this year and then go straight through. What happened was we ended up organizing the book around the values that he demonstrated in the kinds of decisions that he was making. So the book is organized around the values of faith and focus and contextual awareness, stewardship, relationships, and those things were hallmarks of his work in the foundation, but obviously those were carryovers from his work in commerce and business. I mean, there's not two sets of values. They're the same set of values that were operational all the way through.
Right. And did you come across any anecdotes or examples of how he expressed his faith through the company?
It just seemed to be a part of who he was. It didn't seem to be a concentrated effort to convey it. It's just who he was. A phrase that he himself used over and over, and Paul mentioned it, he would call it soul winning. And over you would run across that phrase that he would emphasize. And he wanted people, like Paul said, he wanted people to know the Lord. I think he viewed the way he operated his business with integrity and care of others as a way to introduce that life. So that was what drove him. It was clearly what drove him.
Yeah.
We read in the minutes multiple times that as they talked about grants and helping pastors, that was his really his passion. How do we help pastors be prepared that they can reach more folks to the Lord? And that was always the common thread. We I won't say we joked about it, but it was when we've come to decisions or trying to decide what to do, we would always go back to what would Morris Oldham do? I mean, that's the foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. That phrase, the soul winner, was, there was a famous book by Charles Spurgeon called The Soul Winner. And I think maybe he helped to kind of popularize that term, but of course comes from the verse in Proverbs. It says, "He who wins souls is wise," and
Yes.
is really the one of the key verses for those of us that really are serious about evangelism and believe that that's really a chief part of our calling, whether you're in the business world or standing behind a pulpit. And clearly, if he was grabbing a hold of that term soul winning,
Yes.
that's because I love in that book, for anyone who hasn't read it, it's a classic. Spurgeon talks about soul winning it's everything from winning a game, the idea of winning a battle, and there's so many dimensions to winning, where you really have to contend because in business we have so many forces and distractions that are kind of trying to take us away from that eternal mindset. And clearly we have an example here of Morris Oldham, who he was able to, I'm sure he had his fair share of struggles, but at the end of the day, that's what he was about, was soul winning. Did you come across any of those struggles, personal struggles that he had? Because sometimes we can hold these legends up as kind of flawless saints. And did anything come up in the research?
One of the things that surprised me, and I don't know about you, Paul, was to learn, you may have known this, obviously I started with less knowledge than you would have started with, but his first wife lived only 8 years, and she died when she was 27 years old, and they were childless.
Mm-hmm.
So, he obviously knew heartache very early on.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, of course, remarried Florence, who was the woman who came alongside him with the philanthropy. But he was childless, which was very unusual for a man of his time. And he was a very, very young widow in a brand new city. And, I would consider that a hardship.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Leigh. Also, his wife, Florence, who he married in his 50s, she had a similar marriage, and her husband was ill and died when he was in his 20s. And they both were widowed and for many, many years until their 50s, remarried and met each other at Second Baptist Church and had this focus together. She was had as much passion as he did. So you can sort of understand, reading some of the history of what she did at HBU, that those two could make a lot of things happen.
Two forces of nature.
And so one of the things I've noticed about, Paul, the way you've been operating the Oldham Little Church Foundation, is that you are laser focused on the founder's vision, which I understand in the nonprofit world is not always the case. What were Morris Oldham's wishes concerning the Oldham Little Church Foundation?
When they started the foundation, you go back to the Articles of Incorporation, and they say that they will provide facilities, actually completion facilities grants, for small Protestant evangelical churches, and it was all across the United States. They, from the very beginning, you look at the meeting minutes of board meetings. As I said earlier, the first grant in 1949 was made to a church for $2,000. And the common thread all the way through is supporting churches, those pastors, and many times a seminary, some scholarships, but always focused on what can the foundation do to support soul winning? Mm-hmm. And the continuity of the board, or board members come aboard, there's no tenure. They stay as long as they want. And I think that has really helped. Stuart Morris Sr.'s been on the board 64 years, I believe. And as folks come aboard that are new members, and we begin to explain what we do and the consistency, I mean, there's no question. That's just what we do.
Yeah. And at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of this COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, and I know churches are really just being hammered economically right now, as are so many other businesses. What is kind of the current state of some of those churches that you're supporting?
Well, our churches, the criteria are churches that have no more than 300 members. Average, I would say our church population of the church we support is around maybe 50 folks. I've talked to several pastors who've made application. The dilemma they have, some are bivocational. Spoke to one in a small East Texas town. He's a barber. His wife is a beautician. They've not been able to work for 2 months. They're opening back up now. So he has no income. They're trying to pay the light bill. Some of their folks that work in that community, that particular industry they're working for, has either closed down or they've temporarily shut the doors. So now they're not working, they're furloughed, there's no income. They struggle anyway when everything is good. So this is really just added a lot of misery, stress, disappointment. We've done what we can with many of the churches to either hurry up a grant, make sure we get money to them a little earlier, to make sure that those that are, because they might not be particularly focused on trying to complete an application, to encourage them and help them along so that they can be approved, so we can get money in to them quickly. But they are struggling, and I'm sure the contacts we have are across the U.S. and the story's pretty similar.
Yeah. Is there a favorite story of the impact of the Oldham Little Church Foundation? Maybe an example of a specific church or pastor or community that was helped as a result of the grants that have been given out?
We always enjoy a story about a church in West Virginia that made a grant, or made a request, and we provided a grant to them. And they had an outhouse that was an outhouse. There was no running water, and they were trying to get so they could provide water, and that facility would be at least have a flushing toilet. That was not but about 15 years ago. Now, that doesn't seem like much, but in the wintertime in West Virginia, you've got to walk outside. It's pretty cold. And so they send us letters and notes. We have the most wonderful, thank you notes and cards that we keep from folks all over. But that seems like it's just such a simple thing. But when we provide these grants, as Stuart Morris told me 10 years ago, he said, we're providing grants, but we're also providing encouragement. And that's the theme that we get with a lot of notes. I try to visit about 20 churches a year. They're so thankful that someone from the big city of Houston comes to see them. We're blessed by it. We could write more books. Leigh, we need to do that on stories, lessons learned from some of these pastors. But they're so humble and they're so thankful. for a few $1,000s that those of us that live in the city, that go to large churches, that simply don't think that's really a big support, but it really is.
Yes. And as we wrap it up here, Leigh, I'll start with you. What do you think Morris Oldham's advice would be for this current generation of entrepreneurs?
Well, number one, I would say be brave. I mean, he certainly was. He came to a city he knew no one. He did not know the city. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps and he started small and he wasn't afraid. So I would say be brave. Second, I think I would say appreciate the value of a dollar. And some of my favorite Morris Oldham stories were stories of his frugality. And just not that he was always generous with people, but he was frugal in the way he valued capital and operated on it. There's a story of a radio evangelist who asked him for a donation to his ministry, and Oldham readily agreed. He wasn't, holding on to his money. He readily agreed. But then the evangelist said, "Great, I'll hop in a cab and come to your office and pick up the check today." And he said, "Nothing doing, man. You start walking from your office. I'll start walking from mine. We'll meet in the middle and save the cab fare."
That's great.
So, I mean, he really valued what he earned. He didn't take it lightly. And then the last thing I would say is just love people. And he took care of his people. He clearly valued them. He built relationships at the beginning of his career, Paul. I think this is true, that lasted until he died.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he didn't shift the playing group on a whim every year. The relationships that he made when he landed here in town as a young man, he carried through his entire life. So clearly loved people and valued those relationships. So that would be my opinion. Yeah.
Beautiful. Paul, what would you say in response to that?
Knowing about it, the business, how he ran it, I would think that he would, ask questions of, or promote, have a good business plan, know the folks that you are surrounding yourself with. Mm-hmm. What are they about? How do they think? He was conservative. He pinched pennies. We still do that today. He, I'm sure, would expect a day's worth of work for good pay. Just really simple, honest principles running a business. Everything that we were able to read or hear about him was that, and you don't read much. We talked about that earlier, because he was under the radar. Even though he had dairies in several locations, he always traveled. He wanted to know who his folks were, what that business was about. I'm sure he could have explained any time which one was performing better, because that was all important to him. And we heard stories of how he traveled. When he traveled light. He had an old Plymouth, according to Senior, didn't have heat. And they made a trip one time and they got very cold. But from multiple folks,
he sat on his hands for the whole trip.
He did. He sat on his hands the whole time. He was so cold, and got quizzed the entire time because Mr. Oldham wanted to know about him. But we heard a story that when Mr. Oldham traveled, he wore khakis, and wherever he was going, he didn't take extra khakis. He just bought another pair when he needed them. But he was just that kind of guy. You just can't explain how basic and simple he was, and that just is spread over what he did, what he accomplished.
Yeah. Well, people can get the book Lasting Good if you just go to Amazon, type in Lasting Good, Oldham, it'll pop right up. And you can also get it at oldhamlcf.org, oldhamlcf.org. Definitely, it's a beautiful, beautiful book, very well written, obviously, by our very own guest here, Leigh. And And as she said, it was a real team effort because it was not easy, as I can imagine, to track down and get these stories, and because if you Google, you're not really going to find too much on Morris Oldham, which is really too bad. But hopefully now we've got some people listening that may say, "Hey, I want to dive deeper into his story and maybe see what else they can find." And I'm a firm believer we need more of these stories to be told, because what we're trying to do is to provide models to disciple Christian business leaders, so that they understand that their calling in business is a calling. It's not that you make money so that you can give to real ministry. It's that your business is a calling. And yeah, part of that calling is to be able to give to charitable causes. But clearly there's a great example here for all of us marketplace Christians. Anything else you want to say about where people can connect with the two of you and learn more about what's going on?
I would say about the book, Darren, one of my favorite parts of the book is that we actually sat down with current leaders of business and faith today and interviewed them around the values that were expressed by Morris Oldham in the Phoenix Dairy and in the Oldham Little Church Foundation. So if you read the book, not only will you hear about Morris Oldham and hear from, folks like Stuart Morris and like Paul Sanders, you'll also hear from Robert Sloan of Houston Baptist University and Greg Mott of First Baptist Church, which Morris Oldham was once a member of First Baptist Church. Hank Rush of the Star of Hope, because there are lots of ties between Star of Hope and the Oldham Foundation. So there's some splashes of history of the Navigators, of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, because Dawson Trotman and Billy Graham were personally known to Mr. Oldham. You might not know his name, you would certainly know theirs. Mm-hmm. So it's just rich with those kinds of connections, and the voices that you'll hear in the book, although unfortunately we can't hear Mr. Oldham's voice, you'll hear some voices that echo values that he very deeply believed. So, yeah.
Yeah, Leigh, I think
that's my shameless plug for the for the book.
No, it's very good. I'm glad you brought that out. I would say that folks that at least grew up in Houston or have some roots in Houston, there's a lot of early Houston history, and you can begin to see how the dots are connected. And that to me was very intriguing, having grown up here in Houston. So that was a joy, and I think that Leigh did a terrific job of tying all that together.
Well done to both of you. Thank you for the work that you're doing for little churches, and thank you for the work, the tireless effort that's been put into telling this story. I know we're all better for it.
Thanks for having us, Darren.
Absolutely. Thanks.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a quick rating and review for the Christianity in Business podcast on iTunes. You can get more information about HBU's Center for Christianity in Business at christianityinbusiness.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep integrating biblical values into your business.